Here's another set of undesigned coincidences. In Acts chapter 18, in the beginning of the chapter, it talks about how Paul was preaching the gospel for a year and a half in Corinth. Then he crossed over to Ephesus and returned to his home base of Antioch. Meanwhile, a man named Apollos showed up in Ephesus, as mentioned here in verses 24 through 28. Priscilla and Aquila helped him understand more accurately about Jesus, and then Apollos wanted to travel west to Corinth and Achaia. The Christians in Ephesus wrote letters of recommendation and helped him. When he arrived in Corinth, he was a help and a blessing to the Christians there. Luke describes him as an eloquent man, mighty in the Scriptures. In Paul's letters to Corinth, he alludes to Apollos in several places, but doesn't provide the detailed backstory found in Acts. Yet Paul's allusions perfectly match the story in Acts. In his first letter to the Corinthians, Paul's audience is apparently splitting into groups based on their favorite leader, such as Paul and Apollos and Peter and even Jesus Christ himself, because of their misunderstanding. Paul corrects and notice, especially chapter 3, verse 6, I planted, Apollos watered, but God was causing the growth. This implies that Paul started the church there in Corinth, and Apollos came later and helped them, exactly as Acts describes. So this is an undesigned coincidence. Also, Paul makes some defensive-sounding comments about his own speaking ability. In 1 verse 17, Paul says, Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not in cleverness of speech. In the next few verses, Paul reminds the Corinthians that not many of them were impressive by worldly standards such as worldly wisdom or might, because God has chosen the weak things of the world. In chapter 2, Paul says, And when I came to you, brethren, I did not come with superiority of speech or of wisdom, proclaiming to you the testimony of God, for I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling, and my message and my preaching were not in persuasive words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and power, so that your faith would not rest on the wisdom of men, but on the power of God. And in 2 Corinthians 10, verse 10, Paul refers to what his detractors were saying. They say, his letters are weighty and strong, but his personal presence is unimpressive and his speech is contemptible. So Paul is repeatedly dealing with this issue where he perceives that the Corinthians are despising him and his message because he was not as eloquent as other preachers. This again perfectly fits the pattern in Acts, where the eloquent Apollos visited Corinth after Paul did. Finally, Paul asks in 2 Corinthians 3, verse 1, Do we need, as some, letters of commendation to you or from you? This fits with the description in Acts of the Ephesus church sending letters of recommendation along with Apollos to Corinth. At the least, this is an undesigned coincidence confirming that the churches at that time did send recommendation letters back and forth, and Paul might even be alluding specifically to Apollos here, saying that unlike Apollos, who needed letters, Paul did not need a letter because the Corinthian believers already themselves are the letter. That is because of Paul's ministry among them.